QI, where tonight everything is new. Please welcome the new faces, new kid on the block, it's Jimmy Carr. The newfangled Clive Anderson. The brand new Joe Brand. And the ruddy nuisance, Alan Davis. Let's hear your news. Jimmy goes.
New York, New York.
Clive goes.
Happy New Year, Happy New Year.
Joe goes.
Papa's got a brand new bed.
And Alan goes.
You won't find another fool like me.
The new Seekers.
So much better than the old Seekers.
Absolutely. So, a nice, easy one to start with. What is this island called?
Newfoundland.
No. I'm going to have to shoot you now. No, it isn't the correct pronunciation.
Newfoundland. Hey, enough violence on this show.
Yeah. Newfoundland is the correct pronunciation, and in 1876 a man was killed during a brawl over the correct pronunciation.
Oh, we were lucky, weren't we?
I
We got
know.
right.
Two mill workers, William Aitchison and John Davis, one thought it was Newfoundland and one thought it was Newfoundland. Aitchison threw a punch, Davis drew his gun and killed Aitchison, and he got away, Davis, and he spent 37 years on the run. So there's a really...
Davis?
Yes, Davis.
Any relation?
Yeah.
Possibly.
John Davis, dangerous man.
I had a great uncle who emigrated to Canada.
Did he go to Newfoundland?
Newfoundland.
I think he went to Quebec, actually.
Newfoundland?
And you inherited your shirt from him.
Anyway, just to finish the story, Davis, who killed Aitchison, he ran away for 37 years, and then on his deathbed, 1912, he's in a hospital in Peoria, in Illinois, and he feels so bad about it that he confesses on his deathbed, and then recovered and had to go on the run again.
I think he said, I did that murder in Newfoundland. No, it's Newfoundland!
But actually, both men were right, because at the time, both pronunciations were perfectly acceptable. It's only fairly recently that people have gone a bit...
And what is it now? Without looking?
Newfoundland.
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 OK, and presumably if people are watching this in Newfoundland, they're shouting at their television.
Yes, they're probably...
They're all idiots. I have a constant argument with the pronunciation of Canadian places. My other half is Canadian, and everything seems to be pronounced a little bit faster than it should be. So it's Toronto, not Toronto.
Oh, is it?
Toronto.
Toronto.
Toronto. Like, as quick as you possibly can, like it's a crime to say it. Toronto.
I love Toronto. There used to be a bar there
Toronto.
called the... Sorry, Toronto. There used to be a bar there called the Betty Ford Clinic. What's not to like? There's some fantastic names in Newfoundland. Conception Bay South is the second largest town.
Conception Bay South is... Yeah.
It's Conception Bay South, maybe
No,
there's north.
that's what I
There's
call
also...
it. She doesn't like it. She thinks it's too formal. Come on, love, let's have a look at Conception Bay South. I bought you dinner. We saw the movie you wanted. Come on.
We're moving on to Conception Bay North, I suppose.
Well,
That's a special treat for birthdays.
It's possible...
Which way up is she? Hang on.
It's possible that a girl may prefer the Newfoundland town of Dildo or Eastern Tickle, which I like very much.
Do you?
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Not bad for me age. Newfoundland, what's interesting about it, the very first part of the British Empire, 1583. It's the very first bit of England's first overseas territory. Sir Humphrey Gilbert claimed Newfoundland in 1583. Now, here's a chance for some easy points. When Europeans first arrived in New York, what did they call it? Show.
New Amsterdam.
But it's an Elvis Costello song. It must be right.
And
I think
why I said
either
it.
the
Yeah.
Spanish or the French were there first, so it was
Okay.
either New Madrid or New Paris or Nouvelle Cuisine or something like that.
It was the French, and it was New Angoulême. It was Giovanni di Verrazzano who first named it. A Florentine was working for the French crown, and he absolutely wanted to favour the French king, Francis I, who was originally Francis of Angoulême, is where he came from.
He must have been very pleased when he got there that he could buy a stick of rock to take out.
It's got New Angoulême all the way through it.
The weird thing about him, Verrazzano, there's loads of things in New York named after him, and every single sign has his name misspelled. It's supposed to be double Z, and nobody quite knows whether they didn't have enough Zs in the sign-making department.
Well, they've misspelt Parkway and Bridge as well, so they're obviously not very good.
OK, so here's a fact about New York, which is quite interesting. Gotham. I think I know the history of Gotham, because it's a small village outside Nottingham, where local idiots would live. And someone wrote this book called The Merry Men of Gotham. So then, about 100 years later, there's a writer in New York, and he compares New York. He said, they're all mad here. It's like Gotham City here.
Ah, OK.
They're all idiots.
I didn't know that. Do you know why it's called Manhattan?
Is that a local Amerindian name?
It's a native Lenape American. It's actually quite a nice story. So, 1609, Henry Hudson met a group of native Lenape Americans, and they were fishing, and he offered them alcohol for the very first time. And there was a warrior who swallowed the whole lot to test it and passed out. And everybody thought this was marvellous. And he then brought more alcohol, and they ended up getting fantastically drunk together. And the word, the native Lenape word, Manhaktanek, means the place we all got drunk.
I think the story is that also it was one of those places that was sold for a few beads. And so a few beads were handed over, and the Indians took those. But they had the last off because they weren't even from that local area.
They weren't from that area.
They didn't even own the place in the first place.
They didn't own it at all. They just took the beads and said, thanks, OK, good luck with that. Here is something that was fantastically new in New York in 1909 at Coney Island, which is a glorious place to hang out. They ought to bring this back because it's a really fantastic thing. This is one stretch of track running multiple trains, and if the two meet while travelling in opposite directions, so the passengers are in the lower part, I think you can just see it goes up over the top. I think you can just see the arms of some of the passengers, and then it carries on.
I'm sorry, but that's like a very well-engineered train crash.
Yeah. I should have that on the Northern Line. That would be fantastic.
It's absolutely brilliant. I love that. Yes, indeed, New York was originally New Angoulême. Where would you find the most pyramids in the world? Yes!
Egypt, fuck it.
I'm sure I've heard Mexico, but I bet that's wrong as well, is it?
I've seen one in Las Vegas.
Yes, there is one in Las Vegas.
Let's go.
Switzerland.
Yes, let's try Switzerland.
Switzerland's...
That's so sweet. One man appreciates you.
So wait a minute. So Joe, Alan and I have all been penalised. You come out ahead by saying Switzerland. Brilliant.
Is it the United States? Are there more pyramids in the United States?
No, it's nearer to Egypt than...
Libya, Algeria, Tunisia.
It is, you're in the right part of the world.
Sudan?
It is Sudan, absolutely right. In fact, bizarrely, this is a photograph that I took myself of these Sudanese pyramids. There's about...
Oh, you do your preparation for this show.
What is the travel budget for this show? Where's the licence fee money going? You went all the way over there to take this photo?
I made a long documentary about Sudan, and I really, really recommend this because you go and there is nobody there. It is
Massive civil war could be part of the reason.
Yeah, I did go before the Civil War. So in Egypt, between 118 and 138, in Sudan there are about 220, and they're all in the Meroe area. So this was ancient Nubia, and you can climb them, you can go inside, there's fantastic writing, they have the Meroitic handwriting, incredible carvings.
Are they houses, these ones, or are they burial things?
No, they're burial things, and what's really interesting about them, the Egyptians were clearly for the pharaohs and for the great and the good, they were much more of a meritocracy, and so you get not such wealthy people who had pyramids of their own. And what you can't see here is there was an entire civilization, and from the air you can see the irrigation of tens of thousands of people living there, and then completely destroyed. But the ones in the back, there was an Italian treasure hunter called Giuseppe Ferlini, who in the 1830s chopped the tops off to see if he could find gold inside.
I did a thing, I went to Mexico a couple of years ago, to a place called Coba, and you went through a pine forest for about a mile, sort of quite off the beaten track, and there's just a pyramid in the middle of the jungle, and you go, wow, it's incredible, and take some photos, and the guy just goes, no, you can climb it if you want. Good luck, don't fall off, there's no ambulance. And then you climb up and you realise there are 7 other pyramids in the middle of this
Isn't it
jungle.
amazing?
And they haven't bothered doing putting a fence around it and...
But I think Jimmy's story kind of helped assist my answer, because he's indicating there are lots of these hidden pyramids in Mexico in the middle of forests.
You
So
should see the amount in Switzerland, mate. It's unbelievable.
The other new group in Sudan is the Nuer people. They live on the Nile around Lake Nuer. And their lives revolve entirely around cattle. So the prestige is about how many cattle a man owns. And they have fantastic rituals to do with sacrificing ox, but they are so keen to keep the ox that they'll replace the ox with a cucumber. They want to sacrifice an ox, but it's, you know, an ox, so they use a cucumber. Most of the knowledge that we have about the Nuer comes from an anthropologist called Edward Evans Pritchard, and he worked there in the 1930s, and they didn't think much of him when he arrived, because he didn't have any cows, so they wouldn't help him with his luggage.
Till he took out his cucumber and they were all suddenly impressed.
Now, on to nudity, newlyweds and New England. Who got married in the Emperor's new clothes?
Ooh.
That is a fabulous wedding.
The Emperor.
I want it to be that.
He doesn't do very much in the story, does he? Just
No.
parades around.
But he's a bit of an idiot, isn't he?
I think that's the point of the
Yeah,
story.
I think it is.
What I like about that story
Yeah.
is that 2 swindlers come, and this idea that there were swindlers who'd go from town to town swindling people, and that sort of died out, really, hasn't
When
it?
social media has killed the swindling industry.
You've never
get
had
many
any emails.
You can trust everybody now.
There was a period of time when people got married naked in New England, so 1700s. Why might they do that?
Was it to do with witches?
Prove they were women.
It's not to do with witches, and it's not to prove that you were a woman.
Do you know there's still a thing with popes
The chair.
where they have to carry the chair over the cardinals to check, because they had a female pope, which is obviously a disaster. So they carry him over the top so they can check out his junk.
Sadly, it's a myth, unfortunately.
It's a myth.
It's
Well, you know
wanted to
what?
be.
This is my issue with QI.
Yeah.
You say it's a myth, but I've heard it in a pub. Pretty sure that's the case.
So look, the bridegroom and the bride are
No,
both
just
naked.
the bride.
Is
Is
it
it
something to
horribly-
do with the Bible?
It isn't to do with the Bible, it's to do with debt. They were known as smock marriages, because sometimes they're just in their underwear. And if the bride clearly has no assets, if she's got nothing, then the groom is not liable for her debts, or more importantly, if she's a widow, for her husband's debts.
Wow.
They didn't have to be visible, they just had to be naked. So there's a wonderful wedding that's talked about. February 1789, a man called Major Moses Joy, and he married a widow called Hannah Ward, and she was stark as inside a closet, and basically she reached her arm out through a hole in the door to clasp his hand, and then they got married, and then he'd left some clothes very nicely for her in the cupboard, and then she came out fully dressed.
That's a bit like, you know, if a tree falls in a forest. Is there any sound? If you're naked and nobody can see
Nobody
you...
can see, it doesn't really count,
You're,
does it?
you don't need to be naked, do you?
Yes, I'm sure Lady Gaga would argue she was wearing a wardrobe. Just a hell of a dress.
Is there a head stick out the top of the wardrobe?
It was just her arm out, that was it,
So
yes.
it's a naked
That was
arm?
it, just the arm. Might have been her arm, in fact.
Could have been anyone's arm.
Was yours a nightmare, Joe, your wedding?
Yeah.
Oh.
I couldn't fit in the wardrobe. I had to go in a marquee instead. No, it was lovely.
It's stressful, though, isn't it? I was having a look at the planning nightmare that is a wedding. If you have 17 guests and 2 tables of 10, that has 131,702 possible seating arrangements. A wedding with 100 guests and 10 tables has 65 trillion possibilities as to where you ought to seat people.
Crikey. Well, I had a very little wedding, so I'd said to all my friends, like, don't tell anyone or talk about it. And one of my friends stayed at a local hotel and called a cab to pick her up to take her to our wedding. And she got in the cab and he went, where do you want to go? She went, I'm not telling you.
That's fabulous. They have a great tradition in Sweden. Here's a randy scandy fact. If the bride leaves the reception to go to the bathroom, then all the women in the room kiss the groom. And if the groom leaves, all the men may kiss the bride.
And that is how chlamydia started.
It's a fine name for a child. What's the biggest news item ever?
Has it got anything to do with the Kardashians?
I'm not even really sure who they are, so no.
When was the golden era of the newspapers? When was, like, the biggest circulation? Would it be Titanic?
So it's not an actual news item that we're looking for, so it's not...
So we're not like the moon landing, which is a very big...
It's not a story. It's the actual news.
Did they do, like, a live broadcast for, like, 36 hours or something?
Is it the size of the headline you're looking for? The size
Yes. In fact, you can help me because I actually have a copy of what we're looking for, but I can't manage it on my own. So, Alan and Clive, if you could come and help me. What I'm talking about is the largest newspapers ever published. These were... This is called the Universal Yankee Nation. There you go.
Oh, tiny print.
Yes.
Yes, you seriously had to have...
I mean,
Is this helping your presentation to skills?
I don't want to
Yes.
hurt your feelings, but if Stephen was here, his head would be poking over the top.
If I was good, I could have gone underneath, but I didn't want to play limbo with the newspaper.
Why did they design those?
Maybe there was a tax on each page of newsprint.
That's exactly right.
right.
They were known as blanket sheets or mammoth newspapers or leviathan newspapers, and it was the introduction of these cylinder printing presses that made them possible. So it was the fact that it was possible. This particular newspaper was only published for about a year and a half, from 1841 to 1842, but it was called the largest paper in all creation.
Would have been very useful if you're an extremely fat tramp that was sleeping out.
Yes, except it was only 1 page thick, so it wasn't...
In the summer.
In the sleeping out.
Or if you're two tramps having a liaison.
Yes, but they were designed for sharing. But you said about the duties. It's why we have broadsheets.
there was a tax, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a tax.
When you tax like that, there'd be people trying to avoid it, though, wouldn't there?
I would imagine,
They would
yeah.
have ways of trying to get around it.
I guess some people would, but I mean, they'd be morally bankrupt is what they'd be.
They'd get their papers from Jersey or somewhere,
Yes.
so it would be just crazy.
And probably, if somebody...
Would that work?
So it was a bit like modern fizzy drinks tax. It was to discourage people from buying newspapers because they were so critical of the government. And so
They'll
that's...
tax them out of existence.
Yeah, for a really long time, 1712 till 1855.
And then when they took off the tax, all the sort of Daily Mails, Daily Mirrors, popular press came in because,
all of
you know, relatively poor people could afford to buy the news and find out what's going on.
Yes, but during the time of the tax thing, people would hire newspapers, they would buy second-hand newspapers, they would read them in coffee houses, they would club together to share them. There were even bootleg newspapers.
Second-hand newspapers
Yes.
wouldn't be much use, would they, really?
Well,
Oh, dear, the Titanic sunk 14 years ago.
But you know, when you're on holiday, in the old days, you'd read almost any English newspaper that you find. I remember I'd been in Thailand for 3 weeks and I found a copy of the Daily Mail and I read this brilliant article in it by Norman Tebbit. And he said, I can't be... He said, I can't be the only person who's noticed a rise in serious crime since same-sex partnerships were brought in. He said, no, Norman, you can. You can be the only person.
But this is the thing of the past now, because until a few years ago, when you were abroad, you'd pay any money to get an English language. Now you just get it online, so younger people think, what are they talking about?
It's a real shame, because you go away and you know when people die. It used to be you would get back from holiday...
Yes.
...and that would sort of cheer you up. Oh, I remember. Holiday's over, but oh, he's dead, is he? Yeah. Oh, I liked him.
Anyway, what can you tell me about any of these? OK, so these are newspaper headlines, and I want to know what the story is. Man has sex with steamroller.
Oh, this keeps on coming up. One time.
Well, apparently, 1955, was a man in New Guinea, and he went for a swim, and there was a load of equipment that had been abandoned after the war, and he noticed a steamroller, and there was a bolt missing and a bolt hole. And what did he think? Ooh.
I'll shag that.
Yes.
That's a real view into sort of a man's psyche, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's basically a message to any women watching. Make less effort, there's really no need.
So excited was he by the steamroller that he failed to notice that it was, in fact, in an area where the tide was about to come in. And he got himself stuck as the tide was racing towards him. And he didn't really want to call for help because, you know, awkward.
He's a bit embarrassed.
Yeah. But anyway, he was released by a doctor. Who said it came away all right, but was very badly torn. So I thought quite a low hiss, that one. More boys than girls on that one. Try this one as another headline. Oblong man weds normal woman. Any thoughts on that?
Are they
two-
towns?
They are towns.
Yeah.
It's a headline from an American paper called the Bloomington Pantagraph, and it referred to a couple in Illinois. The town of Normal takes its name from the Illinois Normal State University. Oblong chose their name in 1880 because they were tired of their original name, which was Henpeck.
Well, fair enough. Is this one of those things where they had the headline on the shelf and they were waiting for the
Yes, they
story?
wouldn't you? They almost had it typeset and ready to go. This is a great local news story.
You would certainly think the Catholic Church have got more pressing matters.
This is from a story in 2008 from the Arran Voice. North End Thistle football players on the Ormerdale pitch last week held their breath as a wayward shot at goal from Ben Tattersfield sailed through the air towards the stained glass windows of Broderick Church. But thankfully, the ball struck the surrounding sandstone frame and bounced harmlessly to the ground.
Oh.
And this one, which is from Brighton and Hove, which I like very much.
So is this somebody picking up dog poo?
Yeah.
And they put it, for some reason, they put it in their handbag, I think is the story, and then the handbag gets stolen and...
Well, it's similar to that, but this man on a bicycle actually pinched a bag of poo out of the hands of a woman. She was an elderly dog walker in Worthing.
But where is there a hunt? I mean, you think, oh, thank God for that, he's taken away. I suppose it is hot property still, but...
A spokesman for Sussex Police said the lady was not harmed and clearly the thief stole nothing of value. Anyone with information is asked to call Sussex Police.
Yeah. It's not the sort of stolen goods anyone wants to handle either.
No,
so
not particularly. I mean, there are loads of these. A driver fails to find horn and shouts toot toot, is a story. Black cat seen near M6. That's a headline. Police called to pull up drunk's knickers. Who knows what happened? In other news now, what would you see on Camel News?
Is that the Camel from the Camel cigarettes thing? Is he doing a press conference going, actually, I'm only meant to have one hump? Turns out smoking is not good for you.
It's funny you should say that, because it is associated with Camel cigarettes.
Ah.
Sponsored.
Yes, sponsored, exactly right. It was sponsored news. It was the NBC's first daily news programme. It ran from 1949 to 1956.
Did the guy... Did he have a fag on as he was reading the news?
They had a no-smoking policy. So you were not allowed to show any no-smoking signs at all anywhere in the news, and you were not allowed to show footage of real camels because it was thought to be damaging to the brand.
But yeah, Camel cigarettes, you can see how a camel would ruin it.
Well, they had in those days an actual camel called Joe who used to go around the United States giving out cigarettes. I imagine he wasn't on his own.
You say they weren't allowed to show no smoking signs.
Yeah.
When was the first no smoking sign? Because I've seen a lot of old footage of people doing surgery going, yeah, we'll have it. There you go. Kind of, they're constantly with a fag on.
Well, I mean, it certainly wasn't a problem on television. There used to be a 1950s American television show called Do You Trust Your Wife? OK? And it was sponsored by... it was sponsored by L&M cigarettes. And there was a moment when the host, Johnny Carson, asked a man what star sign his wife was, and he said Cancer, and it had to be redone as Aries because you couldn't have somebody who was a Cancer star sign on an L&M cigarette sponsored show. But there weren't just cigarette sponsors. We don't really have that, do we? Having a particular sponsor. There were
I
lots.
suppose soap operas, you know, were presumably originally genuinely...
Soap flakes used to be the big thing to promote, but also car manufacturers. So the very first news programme was sponsored by Oldsmobile. And the Ford Motor Company, they sponsored a programme, and they only agreed to sponsor it if the Chrysler building was removed from the backdrop showing the New York skyline. Programmes sponsored by Chevy weren't allowed to use the expression Ford a river. I mean, it really was sort of ridiculous about the stuff that they did and didn't allow. Anyway, moving on. What's the one thing that Nigel has in common with Corbyn?
Does it mean the same thing? Is there a meaning?
No, it doesn't mean the same thing at all. It's about the number of children named. 2014 is the last year that we have statistics for, and only 10 babies born in England were named Nigel.
Yeah, Nigel's name has gone out of...
Gone totally out of fashion, but there were also 10 named Corbyn.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are they all being kept in plastic boxes?
Well, in fact, only 8 were kept, 2 were thrown away.
There's another Corbyn. Put it in the cupboard.
Feels like... Is that Angelina Jolie's Amazon order?
The other ones with exactly 10 instances in 2014 include Timotei,
Timotei. You are joking.
Dina, Vishnu, Wilfred, Apollo, Cedric, Barry and Gordon. Anybody guess the peak year for Nigel?
71.
When was Nigel Lawson Chancellor of the
62.
Exchequer?
Oh,
Not then.
No, not then, not then. You're closer. 63 was the peak year for Nigel. 5,529.
Peak year for Nigel.
I know.
Nigel's a bit like Clive. They're sort of names that have sort of come and gone. I don't think many people call Nigel.
Well, Alan's still very popular.
Alan's a good, solid name.
2014, 302 Allans born in the UK.
Fine young man.
Yes. 14 boys called Arsalan.
What now with a who now?
Arsalan.
Arsalan.
A-R-S-A-L-A-N. Arsalan.
Is that the
Well, in
lion?
France.
No, that's Aslan.
Aslan. Well, it's
Well, no,
close enough.
it's actually a Muslim name for lion, Arslan. The girls' names for 2014, the N names were Noreen, Nile and Non. N-O-N, Non. This is my non-child. But the interesting thing is, World War I, lots of names that you wouldn't think now would have been popular. Verdun was very popular, Ypres, Passchendaele, Heligoland. I mean, some extraordinary...
Carnage.
Slaughter. There are 84 pieces and 120 victories and 44 poppies.
The royal family changed their name from Saxe-Coburg to Windsor in the middle of the First World War because of anti-German sentiment. But they only did it in 1917. So they were clearly waiting which way it was going to go. They were 14 which side we're on. Oh, I don't know, it's good.
Anyway, as far as newborns are concerned, Britain hit peak Nigel in 1963. What can you tell me about the false memory diet?
Do you develop a memory that you remember that you've eaten a full meal, and that's a false memory, but then therefore you don't eat? That's a false memory.
It is a false memory, but it doesn't quite work like that. It is a suggested way of getting people to not eat.
Or you put them off food
Yes, put them off certain foods is exactly right.
Well, you make them think they don't like hamburgers.
Well, there was a study in 2011, and what they did was they told people that there was a questionnaire, and the questionnaire could identify early childhood experiences with food. And then somebody would be told that certain foods had made them unwell. So, as a child, for example, got sick after eating carrot. Totally made up, but the participants believed it and went off that food. Right. And the researchers managed to put people off an extraordinary array of things. Strawberry ice cream, white wine, peach yoghurt, dill pickles. It's not a great meal, but... But
you'd have to go through such a huge range of food in order to put people off enough food that they could, in any way,
well, I think you'd start with chips, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I suppose so, but there's still lots of other, filling up foods.
The woman who ran it, Elizabeth Loftus, she said that if you picture a food you don't want to eat and you imagine it making you unwell, then eventually you won't want to eat it anymore and the cravings will go away.
Lettuce.
Success, Joe. Success.
It works.
Lettuce is hard work, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Yeah, lettuce is supposed to make you sleep well.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Because it's so boring.
It's all right with chocolate on it.
There have been some really weird diets, though. There was an 18th century doctor called Malcolm Fleming, and he suggested eating soap as a weight loss method.
I mean, 100% works.
No, it doesn't, and don't do it. That's basically the thing. And didn't
Makes
Elvis...
your wee smell lovely, though.
Yeah.
Elvis did the Sleeping Beauty diet, I think, which is the theory that you drug yourself and you sleep for several days and then you don't eat during the time that you're asleep. It's called the Sleeping Beauty diet.
I mean, Elvis didn't nail the diet thing.
He totally didn't. What's so good about Eye of Newt?
Has it got very few calories in it?
I would imagine. It isn't to do with calories.
Is it gluten-free?
It's nothing to do with food. Nothing to do with food.
So this is Macbeth. Is that we're quoting?
It is in the Scottish play, but what's so great about Eye of Newt?
Medicinal properties.
I think we studied this at school. I think there's a whole list of things that sound like disgusting things, but they're not really. They're references to plants or something.
Well, that is absolutely true. But the thing about the eye of newt that is extraordinary, they did a study where they kept removing the lenses from the eye of a newt.
I bet it annoyed him.
Well, He systematically replaced it. They did it for 16 years, and they keep just replacing the lens. They are able to regenerate new lenses.
That's brilliant. Why can't we do that?
I don't
That's
know,
it. Some
clever.
animals, the teeth replace. It's just...
Specsaver's worst nightmare.
And what's extraordinary about them, the lenses that are replaced are just as good as the very first ones that they had, and they're able to continuously regenerate.
Are you sure he didn't have just insurance or something?
No, maybe.
So, sorry, that's one newt.
That's one newt.
I'm not a big fan of animal testing at the best of times, but 16 years, this poor newt's thinking, oh, him again.
Yeah.
He's going to pull my bloody eye out. I'll grow it back, Dick. 15 years in, is he not thinking, are you not getting the message here? Please grow back.
Presumably there were periods when he couldn't see him coming.
Of course.
Do you know that they're not actually called newts? Did you know that?
What, newts aren't called newts?
No, they're not.
They are. I'll tell you how you know. They're called newts.
It was an ute.
It's like Anne Orange, isn't it?
Yes. Nickname was an ickname, and it became nickname, and newt is just because we're lazy.
Nigel wasn't a name either, it was Anne Nigel.
So this is all new to me. An ickname.
Ickname, yeah.
It was an extra name.
An additional name.
So it was
There are lots of words like that. Apron is one.
In fact, an orange is the other way around, isn't it? It was a naranja is the word, and we call it an naranja.
Yeah. My favourite, it's not actually quite the same thing, is apple pie order, which is French for nappé plié, neatly folded linen. And we just call it apple pie order because we don't speak French. The thing about the witch's brew, you mentioned them at the Scottish play, so you're absolutely right. So the eye of newt and toe of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog, probably wild mustard seed and buttercup leaves and moss and hound's tongue. Isn't that pretty? Hound's tongue on the right.
And what herb was liver of blaspheming Jew, then? Was that a particular...
I'm not sure that was entirely a herb.
Marjoram.
Yeah, marjoram.
It's the worst Welsh rarebit they've ever had.
But the plant on the right stinks. It's also known as mice and rats due to its smell. People used to put it in their shoes to keep dogs away from their shoes. In fact, it stinks.
They used to put it in their shoes because it stinks.
To keep dogs away from... You know what dogs do. They'll
Steal
grab
their
and eat your
shoes.
shoes. Exactly.
And that's why, to this day, dogs don't wear shoes. Good
Yes.
night.
And toe of frog, not sustainable at all. There is a terrible decline in the world. Frog population are absolutely plummeting. In fact, it's now illegal to catch frogs for human consumption in France, and India, which has been the biggest exporter to France for frogs, has just ceased exporting.
I have a pond in my garden. It used to be full of frogs. They used to come and have orgies every beginning of every year. They're not there. They're all replaced by newts now.
This sounds like an angry letter to the Daily Mail. These frogs coming over here, having sex in our ponds.
The most extraordinary newt, I just want to show you this, is unbelievable. It's called the rough-skinned newt. It has enough toxins to kill 25,000 mice. And it's so toxic, this thing, that the Native American tribes used to force-feed them to their enemies to kill them. And the really incredible thing about them is that whatever eats one dies before the newt dissolves in its stomach. That's how toxic it is, and then it hops free.
Oh.
I know.
Well, newts are
Seriously,
fantastic. They can regrow their eyes. They can kill... Why is
Well-
the measure of how toxic it is that it kills 25,000 mice?
Well, it's
that was
just
such
how
an
much
odd
poison. It's just how
end to
much
that
poison it's in
sentence.
it.
Just 4 dogs would be a better system.
How many humans can it kill? That's
It's
what we
usually
want.
things like a mouse the size of Wales it can kill. What about the Spanish newts? They are extraordinary. When threatened, they can shoot their ribs out of their body and stab their enemies with poison.
Oh, I can do that.
That seems counterproductive. I feel like if an enemy's coming towards you, I mean, by all means, defend yourself, but shooting a rib out, even if they don't attack, you're going to have to go to A&E.
Now, it's time for a fresh new batch of general ignorance, although I think we've done quite well so far. Fingers on buzzers. How long is New Zealand's 90-mile beach?
Oh.
Oh, come on,
I think it is 90 miles.
go for it!
Well, are they going to exaggerate or...
What do you reckon?
I say it's 75 miles.
You're getting closer. Any more for any more?
I say it's 6 miles.
Completely miscalculated. It's 55 miles long, and one of the theories is that the mistake was because missionaries knew that it took a day to travel 30 miles and it took 3 days to travel the beach, and so they made the calculation of 90 miles, but in fact they forgot that you travel much slower on sand.
So do people go and walk up it and ask for their money back?
I don't think
Or
so.
drown at the end because they just walk into the sea? If they think, oh, there's another 30 miles to go here.
Well, the Maoris do rather better. They call it Te Unora Otoe, which just means the long beach of Toe. So they won't even... I'm not giving it a number. Just can't be bothered.
Fair enough.
But there are lots of misnamed things. Melbourne's Shark Bay has been renamed. It's called Safety Beach now. And another famous misnaming, the Thousand Islands Archipelago, which is on the US-Canadian border. It's actually 1,864.
So, well, they have to change the name to 1,864 Island Dressing now.
Well, they should do, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
They have rules about what counts as an island. So you have to have at least 1 square foot of land, that's all, above water level for the whole year, and it has to have 2 living trees. Then you're an island. It does look amazing, though, doesn't it? Now, let's have a look at this. OK, so... I'm going to set this up. Good, like that. Right, so my question is, who invented this?
Isn't it Winston Churchill?
I want it to be Winston Churchill.
You're so epically wrong there. Yeah. The buzzer didn't even go off.
Well, we normally call it Newton's balls, don't we? But
I think Newton's cradle would be...
I think Newton's cradle.
I'm afraid I went to a rougher school than you did.
I think if Newton had that many balls, it's no wonder he discovered gravity. Who actually invented it, do we know?
Galileo.
It's not much...
Was it like a toy manufacturer in the 50s?
Sylvia
I
Pankhurst.
can't remember who it is. Is it JFK? Is it Marlon Brando?
It's earlier than that.
Is it Delia Smith?
Roughly how...
It's a French priest in the 17th century.
Charlemagne.
Called Abbé Edmé Marriott.
And then he started the hotel chain.
Yes, that's right. That's right, exactly. He was an amazing thinker, Marriott.
Do we have to guess which one he is there?
He's the one at the back thinking, if I put chocolates on pillows, people will stay here.
I stayed in a hotel where they did that, and I wished somebody had told me. I woke up in the morning, honestly, God, I thought I'd had a brain hemorrhage. It was a terrifying thing.
I made some red lentil and tomato soup the other week, and my
This is
daughter
going to end in tears.
really liked it. It's going, oh, this is lovely. This is lovely. Oh, really delicious. And it was. And then some virus was going around the school. Anyway, middle of the night, I could hear some wailing and screaming, and I went into her bedroom, and there she was in her white nightie with white sheets, and she'd bathed up. And honestly, it looked like she'd been disemboweled. It looked like one of those alarming things. And there was just a sea of red everywhere, and it's all in her hair. It was like Carrie, you know? And I had to pick her up at arm's length and put her in the bath, and then I didn't know what to do with her. She's just covered in lentils. I was going to start hosing her down, and then she was going...
I could never have
Hosing
done
it
that.
down.
It was very, very, very funny.
I could not have done that. My bath's full of gin.
When's the parenting book coming out?
The very first modern, what we call the Newton's Cradle, was created by an actor called Simon Prebble, he was called. He sold it to Harrods in 1967. He wanted to promote it, and so he made a giant version, which had to be taken down after one of the balls knocked out a child. Not good to laugh, people. Not good to laugh. These chrome ones were created by a sculptor and film director called Richard Longcrane.
Is Churchill not involved anywhere in this?
Nothing to do with Churchill. Newton was an extraordinary boy, though.
Massive Pink Floyd fan.
He came 78th out of 80 at school. He used to wander off.
Who else was at school?
Yeah.
Einstein was there.
Bloke on the right thinks it's a lightsaber. Bloody hell, Newton, I think you're onto something.
He made a very strange list of his sins when he was 19, Newton. It included making pies on Sunday night, using Wilford's towel to spare my own, threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. That's quite... wishing death and hoping it to some. There's a fantastic... They've tried to make big Newton's cradles. Here's one made with 15-pound bowling balls by a group...
There's the wrong place. £250 for that, and you've been framed.
The child that must be punished there.
Is that guy with a beard? Is that a baby dangling from, or is that the whole baby with a beard on it?
The biggest Newton's cradle ever built was for the US television show Mythbusters. They used 5 one-ton steel and concrete wrecking balls hung from a steel truss. It was incredibly difficult to make, and it didn't work. So I'm going to put that away. Put that down. Now, fingers on buzzers, name the part of Canada that Britain and America's most popular dog comes from.
Labrador.
Are you saying it's pronounced in a different way, or there's a
No, they
different
don't
dog?
come from Labrador, is the thing of it. So it is the province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland. They are the most popular dogs in the UK and the US, the Labrador Retrievers. They have held the top spot for 25 years running and are exhausted. But they come from Newfoundland and not from Labrador. But what happened was, when they arrived in the UK, there was already a dog called a Newfoundland, also known as a St John's water dog, and so they needed to find another name. So they are so gorgeous.
And they've got a thing they don't stop eating. They've got a genetic mutation. And they
I had a Labrador, and
Yeah.
it was a nightmare,
And
an
it was-
absolute
Yeah,
nightmare.
it's
Good
not
for
their
training them.
fault, turns out. They
Yeah.
can't help it.
Yeah.
I hope they find that in humans soon.
Maybe you're part Labrador.
Maybe I'm all Labrador.
More Labrador, baby.
Do you shake yourself like that after a bath?
I don't have baths.
I'm sorry.
So Labradors aren't from Labrador. Is it close to?
It is absolutely close to. So the province of Newfoundland and Labrador comprises the large island of Newfoundland and the mainland of Labrador. And Labrador is extraordinary. It's 3 times as large as the island, but only 10% of the population live there. It is rather bleak. And that brings us to the scores. Well, this is fantastic. In first place, with a magnificent -5, it's Jimmy! In second place with -16, it's Clive! And in third place with -19, Joe! Which means a triumphant -25. In final place, it's Alan! So it's thanks to Clive, Jimmy, Joe and Alan. I leave you with this. Parkham WI. The speaker at the April meeting was Captain Colin Darsh, who talked about piracy. Embarrassingly, the WI all dressed as pirates for the evening, not realising that Captain Darsh was going to be talking about his experience of being held hostage by Somali pirates, rather than piracy in general. Good night.